I'm Rafaela, 32, raised in a family where success meant corporate suits and corner offices. My brother James was the golden child, while I was the disappointment who chose a different path. Little did they know I was building something special with my restaurant, The Heritage. At my brother's promotion party, they called me a disgrace to my face. But sometimes, life has a way of revealing the truth when you least expect it. If you're watching this video, drop a comment, letting me know where you're from, hit that like button, and subscribe to join me as I share how I finally stood my ground. Growing up in the Thompson household meant living with a very specific definition of success. My parents, Diana and Frank, believed in prestigious degrees, corporate ladders, and the security of a traditional career path. From the beginning, my older brother James was the perfect embodiment of everything they valued. He was studious, practical, and seemed naturally inclined toward the business world even as a child. I, on the other hand, was drawn to different things. Where James excelled at math and debate club, I found joy in art, cooking, and dreaming up business ideas that my parents dismissed as cute hobbies. Even at 10 years old, I remember setting up a lemonade stand that evolved into a weekend neighborhood refreshment service, complete with homemade cookies and fruit tarts I learnt to make from watching cooking shows. "That's nice, Rafaela," my mother would say with that distracted smile that meant she wasn't really listening, "but don't let it interfere with your studies. You need to focus on what really matters." What really mattered in the Thompson household was following the path they'd laid out. My father would constantly hold up James as the example I should follow. "Look at your brother's science project. That's the kind of work that gets you into a good college," he'd say, barely glancing at the intricate food cart design I'd spent weeks perfecting. When I was 13, I entered a young entrepreneur's art competition at school. My mixed media piece representing a fantasy restaurant won first place, and the judges, including local business owners, praised my creativity and vision. The award ceremony was scheduled for a Thursday evening, the same time as James's regional soccer semi-finals. "We'll try to make it for the end of your thing," my mother promised, but I knew they wouldn't. James's game was an hour away, and my parents never missed his events. I stood alone on the stage, accepting my award, scanning the audience for faces that never appeared. Later that night, as my parents gushed about James's winning goal, I tried to show them my trophy and certificate. My father gave it a cursory glance and said, "Was? That's nice, but art doesn't pay the bills, Rafaela." James is setting himself up for a real future. The distance between us grew wider through high school. James was class president valedictorian and headed to an Ivy League business program on partial scholarship. I maintained good grades, but invested most of my energy in culinary arts classes and a part-time job at a local cafe where the owner, Mrs. Garcia, actually valued my input on menu ideas. When college application time came, the battles began in earnest. My parents had mapped out law school or medical school as acceptable options. I wanted to study hospitality management. "That's basically a degree in waitressing," my father scoffed during one particularly heated dinner argument. "We didn't work this hard to put you through college just so you could serve people food." "Frank," my mother attempted to mediate. Though her sympathies were clear, perhaps Rafaela could consider business administration instead. At least that would give her options. But I stood firm, perhaps the first time I truly advocated for myself against their expectations. "This is what I want to do. This is where my passion is." In the end, they reluctantly agreed to help with tuition if I maintained a 3.8 GPA and minored in business administration as a backup plan. I accepted the compromise, knowing that getting their partial support was better than nothing. College became my first taste of freedom and validation. Away from my family's constant comparisons, I thrived in my hospitality management program. My professors recognized my talent and dedication. One in particular, Professor Amanda Jenkins, took special interest in my entrepreneurial ideas. "You have a vision that can't be taught," she told me after I presented my restaurant concept in her advanced hospitality management class. "You understand that a great restaurant isn't just about food, it's about creating an experience, a feeling, a memory." Those words sustained me through every holiday break when I'd return home to face the inevitable family interrogation. James would share stories about internships at prestigious firms, networking with executives, and clear stepping stones toward success. When it came my turn, my parents would listen with tight smiles and quick glances at each other that spoke volumes about their disappointment. "Cooking is a hobby, not a career," my mother would say during these moments. "Unless you plan to become a celebrity chef, which is about as likely as winning the lottery." My father was more direct. "The restaurant industry is brutal, Rafaela. Most places fail within a year. I just don't want to see you waste your potential on something so risky when you could have a stable, respected career. What they never understood was that their definition of respect and stability felt like a prison to me. I wasn't choosing a harder path out of rebellion or stubbornness. I was following a calling that made sense to my soul in a way that corporate life never would. By senior year, while James was already 3 years into his rising career at Meridian Corporation, I had worked at 5 different restaurants, learning every aspect of the business, from inventory management to staff training to customer service. My grades were excellent, and I had even won a competitive internship at a luxury hotel restaurant that my parents dismissed as playing around in a fancy kitchen. The pattern was clear and painful. No matter what I achieved on my chosen path, it would never measure up to their expectations. I would always be the other child, the one who chose wrong, the disappointment. But beneath that pain was growing a determination that would eventually change everything. Graduation day should have been triumphant. I'd maintained that 3.8 GPA. My parents demanded earned high praise from my professors and even secured job offers from 2 respected establishments. But as we gathered for photos after the ceremony, my father's first comment set the tone. Now that this hospitality phase is over, have you thought about graduate school? There's still time to apply for a business program for the spring semester. I remember the weight of those words, how they diminished 4 years of hard work into a phase that needed to be corrected. My mother quickly jumped in with brochures for MBA programs she'd brought along as if my degree was merely a detour before getting back on their approved path. That evening, as they hosted a small graduation dinner where conversations inevitably turned to James's recent promotion at Meridian Corporation, I made a decision. I thanked them for the support they had provided, collected my few belongings, and moved into a tiny studio apartment across town the very next day. If I was going to build my life, I needed to do it away from the constant shadow of their disappointment. I took a job at the Silver Spoon, a struggling local restaurant with outdated decor and a menu that hadn't changed in 15 years. The pay was minimal, but the opportunity was perfect. The owner, Samuel Wells, was a 73-year-old widower who had lost his passion for the business after his wife passed away. The restaurant had been their shared dream, and without her, he was simply going through the motions. "Why would you want to work here?" Samuel asked during my interview, gesturing around the half-empty dining room with water stains on the ceiling and mismatched chairs. "A young woman with your education could find something better. Because I see what this place could be," I answered honestly. "And I want to learn everything, including how to turn around a struggling establishment." Something in my answer reached him. He hired me as assistant manager, though the title was more generous than the responsibilities, which included everything from hosting to bookkeeping to occasionally jumping in on the line when the cook needed help. Samuel became the mentor I desperately needed. Unlike my family, he saw my passion for the industry not as a flaw, but as a gift. He taught me the unglamorous realities of restaurant ownership, the razor-thin profit margins, the personnel challenges, the regulatory hurdles. But he also shared the joys that had sustained him and his wife through 30 years of ownership, the regular customers who became like family, the satisfaction of creating spaces where people celebrated life's milestones, the magic of a perfectly executed service. "Your parents don't understand because they've never created something from nothing," Samuel told me one night after closing as we shared a glass of wine at the bar. "They've lived in the world of working for others, climbing someone else's ladder. That's honourable, but it's not the only path." Over the next year, I poured everything into learning the business. I updated the bookkeeping system, refreshed the menu while keeping beloved classics, started a social media presence, and worked with local suppliers to improve food quality while controlling costs. Slowly, the Silver Spoon began to show signs of life. Regular customers returned more frequently. New faces appeared. Revenue ticked upward. My parents remained unimpressed. "Assistant manager at a diner," my father summarized during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "James just closed $1 million deal for Meridian." I stopped correcting them about the nature of the restaurant or explaining the improvements we were making. They weren't interested in understanding my world, and I was tired of offering explanations that fell on deaf ears. Then came the conversation that changed everything. Samuel invited me to stay after closing one Tuesday night. He looked more serious than usual as he placed a folder on the table between us. "I'm 74 years old, Rafaela. Margaret and I never had children. I've been holding on to this place because it was our dream, but the truth is, I'm ready to retire." He pushed the folder toward me. "I want to sell you the Silver Spoon." I stared at him in shock. "Samuel, I appreciate the thought, but I could never afford to buy a restaurant." He smiled. Opened the folder. Inside was a proposal that took my breath away. Samuel had structured a deal where I could purchase the restaurant with a modest down payment, with the remainder financed through a 7-year owner-carry agreement at a favorable interest rate. He'd even included the option to rebrand the restaurant completely. "You've breathed new life into this old place," he said, his eyes misty. "I've watched you these past months. You have what it takes. Margaret would have loved to see you take over." I spent days analysing the numbers, creating business plans, and weighing the enormous risk against the potential. The responsible thing would have been to consult my family, but I already knew what they would say. Instead, I met with Professor Jenkins, who reviewed my plans and connected me with a former student who had successfully launched her own restaurant 5 years earlier. When I finally signed the papers, I felt equal parts terror and exhilaration. At 23, I was a restaurant owner. The Silver Spoon would become The Heritage, a name that represented both a connection to culinary traditions and a personal reclamation of what legacy could mean. I called my parents to share the news naively, hoping that this concrete achievement might finally earn their approval. My mother answered, and I could hear the television in the background as I explained my exciting development. "You bought a failing restaurant, Rafaela. That's incredibly irresponsible. Do you have any idea what you're getting yourself into?" She called my father to the phone, and his reaction was even more dismissive. "This is financial suicide," he declared. "Restaurants fail at a higher rate than almost any other business. You're going to lose every penny you've saved and end up with massive debt. I can't believe you would make such an impulsive decision without consulting us." "It wasn't impulsive," I tried to explain. "I've been working there for over a year. I know the business inside and out. I've done extensive planning." "Planning doesn't replace experience," he interrupted. "You're barely out of college and you think you can run a business. This is exactly the kind of impractical thinking we've always worried about with you." The conversation ended with my mother sighing that they would be there to help when it inevitably failed. And wasn't it fortunate that James could probably find me an administrative position at Meridian when this restaurant phase has run its course? Those first months of ownership tested everything in me. I worked 16-hour days handling everything from repairs to inventory to marketing. I slept on a cot in the office some nights, too exhausted to drive home. When the main refrigeration unit failed 2 months in, I nearly depleted my emergency fund getting it replaced. When the head chef quit without notice on a Friday before a fully booked Saturday service, I stepped into the kitchen myself, running on adrenaline and determination. But gradually, painfully, the Heritage began to find its identity. I implemented a farm-to-table concept, building relationships with local producers and creating a menu that changed seasonally to showcase the freshest ingredients. I renovated the space section by section as funds allowed, creating a warm, inviting atmosphere that balanced rustic charm with contemporary touches. 6 months in, we had our first profitable month. It was small, just $267 after all expenses, but it was proof that my vision could work. I celebrated alone with a glass of champagne after closing, too used to keeping my victories to myself to share even this milestone with my dismissive family. 3 years passed in a blur of hard work and gradual success. The Heritage transformed from a struggling neighborhood restaurant into a destination dining spot that required reservations weeks in advance for weekend dinners. Each step had been a careful balance of ambition and pragmatism. When the ancient point-of-sale system crashed during a busy service, leaving servers writing orders by hand, I researched for weeks before investing in a modern cloud-based system that improved efficiency and provided valuable data on sales patterns. When the dishwasher quit after a dinner rush, leaving mountains of dirty plates, I rolled up my sleeves and washed dishes until 3 a.m., myself, rather than risk our quality standards. Every challenge became a learning opportunity. When a competing restaurant opened 3 blocks away with a similar concept but deeper financial backing, I didn't panic. Instead, I doubled down on what made the Heritage special: our relationships with local farmers, our rotating seasonal specials, and the personal touch I brought to every aspect of the dining experience. The first major breakthrough came when Elise Monroe, the region's most respected food critic, visited unannounced. Her review, published in the Sunday edition of the City paper, described the Heritage as a revelation, a restaurant that understands that authenticity cannot be manufactured, only earned. Chef-owner Rafaela Thompson has created more than a dining establishment. She has created a genuine experience that honors both culinary tradition and innovation. The review mentioned my age, remarkably accomplished for a 26-year-old entrepreneur, and included a photo of me in the kitchen. I framed the article and hung it in my office, then sent copies to my parents and James, hoping this external validation might finally help them see the legitimacy of my path. My mother called the following week. "We saw the article," she said, her voice measured. "It's certainly nice to get some attention for your restaurant, though I do hope you're putting some money aside. The restaurant business can be so volatile. No congratulations, no acknowledgement of the achievement, just another warning about eventual failure." James sent a text that read, "Saw your restaurant thing in the paper, cool." It was more acknowledgement than I expected from him at least. The heritage continued to evolve. I expanded our catering services for private events, which proved extremely profitable, and raised our profile among corporate clients and wealthy families planning celebrations. I launched a small line of signature products, our house vinaigrette spice blends and preserves et wassails, that were sold at the restaurant and at select local grocers. By our third anniversary, the heritage employed 22 people full-time and another dozen part-time for large events. We had won regional awards for culinary excellence and sustainable business practices. Our revenue had grown over 300% from the first year, and I had finally begun paying myself a reasonable salary after reinvesting most profits back into the business. Yet when I attended family gatherings, the same dynamics persisted. My parents devoted extensive time to discussing James's career trajectory at Meridian Corporation, where he'd been steadily climbing the executive ranks. They proudly detailed his company car, his bonuses, his business trips to New York and London. When conversation turned to me, they referred to the heritage as Rafaela's restaurant job and quickly changed the subject to ask if I was dating anyone or had considered going back to school for something more substantial. At one particularly painful Thanksgiving dinner, my Aunt Teresa patted my hand and said, "It's so good that you've stuck with this restaurant thing. Most creative types bounce around, but you've shown real commitment to your little business." The patronizing tone, the diminishing language, little business, for an operation that now generated 7 figures annually, it all reinforced that in their eyes I would always be the lesser sibling who had chosen a lesser path. I learned to protect myself by sharing less, by creating a carefully edited version of my life that wouldn't invite their judgment. When asked directly about the restaurant, I gave vague positive responses. "Things are going well, thanks for asking." When they inquired about finances, I deflected with generalities. "The industry has its ups and downs, but we're managing." This protective distance extended to James as well. Where we had once been close as young children, his absorption of our parents' values and his own busy corporate life meant our interactions were now limited to holiday gatherings and the occasional text message exchange. He never visited the heritage, despite my open invitations always citing work commitments or scheduling conflicts. Then came the email from James announcing his promotion to Vice President of Operations at Meridian Corporation. The message addressed to family members detailed the significant raise, expanded responsibilities and status that came with the position. My parents were hosting a celebration dinner at their home the following Saturday, and attendance was clearly expected. My first instinct was to make an excuse. These family gatherings had become exercises in emotional endurance, and I had a legitimate reason to decline. Saturday nights were our busiest service at the heritage, but some mix of obligation and hope prompted me to arrange coverage at the restaurant so I could attend. Perhaps this time, with my business now established and successful, they might see me differently. That same week, I received an unexpected email from Meridian Corporation's events coordinator. The company was planning their annual executive retreat and seeking proposals from catering services. A colleague had recommended the heritage based on a private event we had catered. The timing seemed serendipitous. I spent hours perfecting our proposal, showcasing our farm-to-table philosophy, our capacity to handle events of that size, and our experience with corporate clients. I included testimonials, sample menus, and professional photographs of previous events we had catered. I debated whether to mention my connection to James, ultimately deciding against it. The heritage had earned this opportunity on its own merits, and I wanted to win the contract the same way. 2 days before James's promotion party, I received confirmation that the heritage had been selected to cater Meridian's executive retreat, a prestigious contract worth over $50,000. It was a significant win for the business, one that would raise our profile in the corporate catering market considerably. I almost called James to share the news, thinking it might finally be something that would impress him and my parents. But years of dismissal had taught me caution. I decided to wait until after his promotion celebration. This was his moment, and I didn't want to create any awkwardness if, as I suspected, my achievement would be minimized compared to his. As I selected an outfit for the party, a tailored navy suit that projected the professionalism my family seemed to respect, I rehearsed responses to the inevitable questions and comments. I was determined to maintain my dignity regardless of how they treated me. The Heritage's success spoke for itself whether my family recognized it or not. What I couldn't have anticipated was just how painfully clear their dismissal would be that night, or how dramatically the tables would turn. The evening of James's promotion party arrived with a perfect June sunset that bathed my parents' suburban home in golden light. I parked my car at the end of the driveway, already filled with the luxury vehicles belonging to my extended family. Taking a deep breath, I checked my appearance one last time in the rearview mirror and prepared myself for the evening ahead. The front door opened before I could even knock, revealing my mother in an elegant blue dress, her hair freshly styled for the occasion. "Rafaela, you made it." Her smile seemed genuine if surprised. "I know Saturdays are busy at your place." "I wouldn't miss James's celebration," I replied, stepping inside and handing her the bottle of wine I'd brought a special reserve from a vineyard that supplied the Heritage exclusively in our region. Not that she would appreciate that detail. The living room was filled with family members I saw only at holidays and special occasions. Aunt Teresa and Uncle Robert were deep in conversation with my father by the fireplace. Cousins and their spouses clustered around the refreshment table. My grandparents sat in their usual spots on the sofa, looking frailer than I remembered from Christmas. "Rafaela." My grandmother spotted me first, waving me over with a warm smile that momentarily eased the tension in my shoulders. Unlike my parents, she had always shown genuine interest in my restaurant, even if she didn't fully understand the industry. "Hi, Grandma." I leaned down to kiss her cheek, inhaling the familiar scent of her lavender perfume. "You look beautiful tonight." "Oh, this old thing," she waved dismissively at her dress before patting the seat beside her. "Sit, tell me how you've been. That restaurant of yours keeping you busy?" Before I could answer, Aunt Teresa swooped in, martini in hand. "Rafaela, what a surprise to see you here. I figured you'd be too busy waiting tables or whatever it is you do at that cute little place of yours." I fixed a polite smile on my face. "Actually, I don't wait tables much anymore. Managing the full operation keeps me pretty occupied." "Managing?" She laughed as if I'd said something charming. "Listen to you with the corporate lingo. Playing restaurant owner suits you." She turned to my grandmother. "Mom, did you hear? James will have 30 people reporting to him in this new position, 30 and a corner office on the executive floor." And just like that, the conversation shifted away from me and back to the star of the evening. I excused myself to get a drink, needing a moment to compose myself. At the bar set up in the dining room, I encountered Uncle Robert, who was refilling his scotch. "There's my bohemian niece," he greeted me, his voice just loud enough for nearby relatives to hear. "Still running that restaurant, eh? When are you going to get a real career like your brother?" I measured my response carefully as I poured myself a glass of wine. "The Heritage is a real career, Uncle Robert. We're doing very well." He patted my shoulder condescendingly. Sure, but there's no security in small business, especially restaurants. One bad review, one health inspection, and poof." He made an explosive gesture with his fingers. "At least with a corporate job, you get benefits, retirement plans. You're what, 27 now? Time to start thinking about the future." "I'm 32, I corrected him, "and I have excellent benefits and a retirement plan. I provide them for my employees too." He looked skeptical, but was prevented from responding by my father's announcement that dinner would be served shortly. I used the moment to slip away, scanning the room for James. I found him near the patio doors, surrounded by admiring relatives. He looked every inch the corporate success in his tailored suit, his posture radiating the confidence that came from external validation and certainty about one's place in the world. "James," I approached during a brief lull in his conversation. "Congratulations on the promotion. I'm really happy for you." He turned, seeming genuinely surprised to see me. "Rafaela, you made it." There was a moment of awkwardness as he seemed to debate whether to hug me before settling on a quick shoulder squeeze. "Thanks for coming. Didn't think you'd be able to get away from the restaurant on a Saturday." "I wanted to be here for your big moment," I said simply. He nodded, a flicker of something appreciation, guilt, crossing his features, before his attention was claimed by another relative. I drifted toward the dining room, where my mother was directing everyone to their seats. The elaborate dinner that followed was a testament to my parents' pride in James's achievement. My mother had prepared all his favorite dishes, and my father had selected wines specifically paired with each course. The table setting was immaculate, with the good china and crystal brought out for the occasion. As we ate, the conversation revolved exclusively around James's accomplishments and the prestige of his new position. My father beamed as he recounted how James had been selected over candidates with more years at the company. My mother detailed the perks that came with vice presidential status, the executive gym membership, the increased vacation allowance, the stock options. I listened quietly, offering appropriate responses when directly addressed, but otherwise focusing on my meal. Years of similar dynamics had taught me to expect nothing different, yet it still stung to be so thoroughly sidelined at a family gathering. After the main course, my father stood at the head of the table, champagne flute in hand. "I'd like to propose a toast to James," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. From the time he was a boy, we knew he was destined for greatness. He has never wavered from pursuing excellence, never settled for less than the best. As parents, there is no greater joy than watching your child achieve their full potential. He paused, looking directly at James with undisguised pride. "It gives me enormous satisfaction to have at least one child who makes us truly proud, who has built a life and career worthy of respect and admiration." The words landed like a physical blow. At least one child. The implication hung in the air as relatives raised their glasses, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the slight to the other child sitting at the table. I kept my expression neutral with effort, raising my glass mechanically, while fighting the burning sensation behind my eyes. This was beyond their usual subtle dismissal. This was an explicit statement that I had failed to make them proud, that my achievements were unworthy of respect. As dessert was served, Aunt Teresa turned to me with artificial brightness. "So, Rafaela, any exciting developments in your life? Dating anyone special?" The transparent attempt to change the subject to something she deemed appropriate for me. My romantic life, rather than professional accomplishments, only twisted the knife further. "Nothing new to report," I answered evenly. "The restaurant keeps me quite busy." "That restaurant," my mother sighed from across the table. "Sometimes I worry it's becoming an excuse for you to avoid other aspects of life, dear. All work and no play, you know." "The heritage isn't just work for me," I said, unable to entirely keep the edge from my voice. "It's my passion and my purpose." My father scoffed lightly. "Passion doesn't build security, Rafaela. At some point you need to think practically." I heard a whispered comment from further down the table. "Always been the family disgrace. Such potential wasted on playing restaurateur." The speaker, my father's sister Catherine, hadn't meant for me to hear, but the table had momentarily quieted at just the wrong moment. Several relatives looked uncomfortable, but no one contradicted her. The family disgrace. I placed my napkin beside my half-eaten dessert and stood. "Excuse me for a moment," I managed to say with remarkable steadiness given the turmoil inside me. I walked calmly to the kitchen, closed the door behind me, and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of their judgment. Leaning against the counter, I fought back tears that would ruin my carefully applied makeup. I had built something significant from nothing. I employed over 30 people. I had won awards and recognition in my field. Yet here in this house, I would always be the disappointment, the cautionary tale, the disgrace. I considered leaving immediately. I could text James later with an excuse, an emergency at the restaurant, a sudden migraine. No one would question it, and it would spare me further humiliation. But that would feel like conceding their assessment of me was correct. I was tired of shrinking myself to accommodate their limited vision of success. I splashed cold water on my face, reapplied my lipstick, and made a decision. I would stay exactly 30 more minutes, long enough not to create a scene with an abrupt departure, but not a minute longer than necessary in this environment of judgment and dismissal. As I rejoined the gathering in the living room, where coffee and after-dinner drinks were being served, I checked my watch discreetly. 30 minutes. I could endure anything for 30 minutes. What I couldn't have anticipated was how dramatically everything would change in exactly that time frame. I had barely rejoined the party when the doorbell rang, causing a momentary pause in conversation. James, who had been describing the executive retreat his team would be planning, looked surprised. "Are we expecting someone else?" my mother asked, glancing around the already full living room. James checked his watch, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. Actually, I forgot to mention Marcus Williams might stop by briefly. He's my CEO, and he mentioned wanting to congratulate me personally, since he and his wife were going to be in the area tonight. The announcement sent a ripple of excitement through the room. My mother immediately began straightening cushions and gathering empty glasses, while my father adjusted his tie and muttered about getting another bottle of the good scotch from the cellar. Marcus Williams, Uncle Robert repeated, clearly impressed. The Marcus Williams isn't Meridian, one of the fastest-growing companies in the region under his leadership. James nodded, trying to appear casual, though I could see the pride in his posture. Yes, he's really revolutionized the company since he took over as CEO 3 years ago. Doubled our market share, expanded internationally. And he's coming here, my mother asked, a note of panic in her voice as she assessed the state of the living room. James, you should have warned us. It's just an informal stop-by, James assured her, though he too was straightening his suit and checking his reflection in the decorative mirror over the fireplace. 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. James went to answer it himself, returning moments later with a distinguished-looking couple in their 50s. Marcus Williams was tall and fit, with salt and pepper hair and a commanding presence that immediately drew attention. His wife Elaine was elegantly dressed in a simple black dress with a striking emerald necklace. Everyone, this is Marcus Williams, CEO of Meridian Corporation, and his wife Elaine, James announced, with barely concealed pride. Marcus, Elaine, this is my family. My parents rushed forward to welcome them, effusive in their greetings. Marcus shook hands warmly with my father, complimenting the home while accepting the offered glass of scotch. The energy in the room had transformed completely. Everyone seemed to be standing a little straighter, speaking a little more carefully, eager to make a good impression on James's prestigious guest. I hung back slightly, not wanting to crowd the new arrivals and feeling somewhat out of place in this corporate admiration society. I planned to make a polite introduction and then slip away to make my exit now that the attention was firmly elsewhere. Marcus Williams was making his way around the room, shaking hands with various relatives as James made introductions. I watched as he chatted briefly with each person, showing the practiced social skills of someone accustomed to navigating rooms full of people eager for his attention. Then his gaze swept the room and landed on me. Something flickered across his face, recognition, surprise, and he paused mid-conversation with my aunt. Excusing himself, he began walking directly toward me, a smile spreading across his face. James, noticing his boss's trajectory, hurried to intercept and make a proper introduction. Marcus, this is my sister Rafaela. Rafaela, this is Marcus Williams, CEO of Meridian. But before James could continue, Marcus extended his hand to me with genuine enthusiasm. Well, if it isn't the owner of the heritage. The room fell suddenly completely silent. I shook his hand, managing a composed smile despite my shock. Mr. Williams, it's a pleasure to meet you. The pleasure is entirely mine, he replied warmly. I was just telling Elaine about the incredible proposal your team put together for our executive retreat. The farm-to-table concept, the sustainability initiatives, exactly what we were looking for. I had no idea you were James's sister. James's expression was a study in confusion. You know Rafaela's restaurant? Marcus turned to him with surprise. You didn't know the Heritage is the top-rated restaurant and catering service in the region. We reviewed proposals from 5 companies for the retreat, and the Heritage was the clear standout. He turned back to me. I took my wife there for our anniversary last month. That seasonal tasting menu with the wine pairings was exceptional. Elaine still talks about that maple-glazed duck breast. My father stepped forward, his expression a mix of confusion and dawning reassessment. I'm sorry you've eaten at Rafaela's restaurant. Several times, Marcus confirmed. It's become my go-to for business dinners, when I want to impress clients. The attention to detail, the service, the food quality, it's world-class. Your daughter has built something remarkable. Elaine joined the conversation, touching my arm lightly. When Marcus told me the Heritage would be catering the retreat, I was thrilled. That chocolate souffle with lavender cream changed my life. She laughed softly. I've been trying to recreate it at home without success. I smiled genuinely for the first time that evening. That's actually my grandmother's recipe with a few modern updates. I'd be happy to share it with you. Marcus continued, seemingly oblivious to the stunned silence that had fallen over my family. You know, we had the Regional Chamber of Commerce meeting last quarter, and your name came up as one of the most successful young entrepreneurs in the area. 7-figure revenue within 4 years of opening, isn't that right? And I heard you're planning to open a second location. The casual mention of my restaurant's financial success caused my mother to nearly drop her wine glass. 7 figures. The number hung in the air like a revelation. We're in the early planning stages, I confirmed, keeping my voice steady despite the emotional whirlwind inside me. We've outgrown our current space, and demand has been strong enough to support expansion. James was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. You're opening a second restaurant? Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. Your sister is quite the business powerhouse, James. Frankly, she should come speak to our leadership team about entrepreneurship and risk management. Building a successful restaurant from the ground up in this economy that takes vision and extraordinary execution. My Aunt Teresa, who had earlier dismissed my work so casually, stepped forward with a radically different tone. Rafaela has always had such a good head for business. We've been following her success closely, haven't we, Robert? Uncle Robert nodded vigorously, conveniently, forgetting his earlier comments about me getting a real career. Absolutely. Very proud of our niece. The naked hypocrisy might have been amusing if it weren't so painful. I maintained my professional smile, years of customer service experience, helping me mask my true feelings. My father cleared his throat, visibly recalibrating his position. Rafaela has always been very determined. When she sets her mind to something, that determination has clearly paid off, Marcus replied. The heritage has become a regional landmark in just a few years. That's no small achievement. He turned to address the room more broadly. James didn't mention we'd be meeting the culinary star of the family tonight. You must all be incredibly proud. The uncomfortable silence that followed spoke volumes. No one knew how to respond because the truth was, they hadn't been proud. They hadn't even been paying attention. My mother recovered first. Of course we're proud of both our children. They're just successful in different ways. Marcus nodded, oblivious to the undercurrents. That's the dream, isn't it? Having children who find their own paths and excel. You must be thrilled. Elaine, perhaps more perceptive than her husband, gave me a questioning look. I returned a slight private smile that acknowledged the awkwardness of the situation. The conversation continued, with Marcus sharing more details about why the heritage had been selected for their retreat and how impressed he'd been with our business model. Each word was a vindication I had never sought, but now found washing over me with unexpected emotional impact. James stood slightly apart, his expression unreadable, as his boss lavished praise on the sister whose achievements had been so thoroughly dismissed at his own celebration. My parents hovered nearby, their faces a study in conflicting emotions. Pride in having impressed Marcus Williams warring with the uncomfortable reality that they had been drastically wrong in their assessment of my career. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen in my family's home. Not as the disappointment or the black sheep, but as exactly who I was, a successful entrepreneur who had built something meaningful through vision, hard work, and courage. The validation wasn't coming from my family, but it was happening in front of them, impossible to dismiss or minimize. As Marcus and Elaine prepared to leave after about 20 minutes, they had another engagement to attend. He shook my hand again. I look forward to working with you on the retreat, and please let me know when you open that second location. Elaine and I would love to attend the opening night. After they departed, the atmosphere in the room remained charged with unspoken tension. Family members glanced between me and my parents, waiting to see how this dramatic shift in perception would be addressed. I checked my watch. My 30 minutes had stretched to 40, but now I was glad I had stayed. Not out of vindictiveness or a desire to witness my family's discomfort, but because something fundamental had changed. The truth about my work and its value had been spoken aloud by someone they couldn't help but respect. Whatever happened next, that truth would remain. I gathered my purse, prepared to make my exit, while this unexpected victory was still fresh. But before I could say my goodbyes, my father approached, gesturing toward his study. Rafaela, could we speak privately for a moment? His tone wasn't angry or dismissive as I might have expected. Instead, he sounded uncertain, almost tentative, an unfamiliar quality in a man who had always been so sure of himself and his judgments. I nodded, following him into the familiar room lined with books and family photographs. My mother joined us, closing the door behind her. James remained outside, still processing his own thoughts about what had transpired. What followed would be a conversation that began the long, complicated process of healing wounds that had festered for years. My father paced the study for a moment before turning to face me, his expression a complex mixture of confusion and something that looked almost like remorse. Why didn't you tell us about any of this, Rafaela? The success, the revenue, the expansion plans, why keep it secret from your family? The question was so absurd I almost laughed. I wasn't keeping secrets, Dad. I tried to tell you, all of you, many times. I sent articles when we were featured in local press. I invited you to events at the restaurant. I mentioned milestones and achievements during family gatherings. I took a breath, keeping my voice level. But you were never interested. You called it my restaurant job, or my little business. You changed the subject whenever I brought it up. After a while, it became clear that no matter what I accomplished in this field, it wouldn't count as real success to you. My mother sank into the leather armchair by the fireplace. Surely that's an exaggeration. We've always supported your interests. No, Mum, you haven't, I replied firmly. You've tolerated them at best. Let me ask you something. Have either of you ever eaten at the Heritage even once in the 4 years I've owned it? Their silence was answer enough. James hasn't either, I continued. I've invited all of you repeatedly. You always have excuses, but the truth is, you never wanted to acknowledge that this is my actual career, not a phase or a hobby or a stepping stone to something you'd consider more appropriate. My father's defensiveness surfaced. Now wait a minute. We were concerned about your future. The restaurant industry is notoriously difficult. Yes, it is, I interrupted. It's incredibly challenging. I work 70-hour weeks sometimes. I've overcome obstacles you can't even imagine because you've never bothered to ask about them. But instead of recognizing that difficulty as evidence of my commitment and capability, you used it as a reason to dismiss my choice entirely. I gestured toward the door beyond which the party continued. Tonight before Marcus Williams arrived, you literally called me the family disgrace. Do you remember that toast, Dad? At least one child who makes us proud. He had the grace to look ashamed. I didn't say disgrace that was your aunt. And you didn't contradict her. I pointed out. No one did, because that's how you all see me. The disappointment, the one who chose wrong. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. We were worried about you, Rafaela. We wanted security for you, a clear path. No, I cut in gently but firmly. You wanted me to follow a path that made sense to you, that fit your definition of success. You never tried to understand my vision or my passion. You decided what success should look like, and when my choices didn't match that image, you wrote me off. My father sat heavily on the edge of his desk. It wasn't like that. We just couldn't understand why you'd choose such a difficult road when you had other options. Did you ever really ask with an open mind, not with judgment already colouring your questions? I waited, but again, their silence spoke volumes. I chose this path because it's where my talents and passions align. I'm good at what I do, and it fulfills me in a way that climbing a corporate ladder never would. I moved toward the door, feeling emotionally drained, but somehow lighter. For what it's worth, the Heritage will gross over $2 million this year. We employ 34 people with full benefits. I own the building now, and we're expanding to a second location. By any objective measure, I've built a successful business. The fact that you needed to hear it from someone like Marcus Williams to believe it says everything about our relationship. My hand was on the doorknob when my mother spoke again, her voice small and uncertain. We've made mistakes, haven't we? I turned back to look at her. Yes, you have. For years, you've made me feel like I wasn't enough, like my achievements didn't count. Tonight was just the most explicit version of something I've felt at every family gathering since I opened the Heritage. My father stood looking suddenly older. I don't know what to say, Rafaela. We thought we were guiding you toward the best future. I know you believe that, I acknowledged. But you were guiding me toward your idea of the best future, not mine. And in the process, you missed seeing who I really am and what I've accomplished. I opened the door. I need to get back to the restaurant. We have a full house tonight, and I should check in with the team. Will you come for dinner sometime? My mother asked hesitantly. Perhaps we could talk more. Maybe come see the restaurant. The olive branch was small but significant. I nodded, not committing to a specific time, but leaving the possibility open. That would be a start. As I re-entered the living room, James was waiting, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Rafaela Share, he began. I had no idea about the retreat contract. About any of it, really. I know, I said simply. I should have visited your restaurant. I meant to, but work was always... I cut him off with a raised hand. James, this is supposed to be your celebration night. We can talk another time. He nodded, then added, for what it's worth, what Marcus said, that's a big deal. He doesn't give praise easily. I'm impressed, honestly. Coming from James, who had never shown interest in my work before the admission was significant. I offered a small smile. Thanks. Congratulations again on your promotion. As I made my way toward the front door, various relatives approached, suddenly eager to hear more about my restaurant, or express interest in dining there. Aunt Teresa mentioned she had investment capital available if I needed partners for my expansion. Uncle Robert claimed he'd always believed in supporting family businesses. I navigated these transparent attempts at connection with polite but non-committal responses. The family Disgrace had suddenly become someone worth knowing, someone with connections to the Marcus Williamses of the world. The transformation would have been amusing if it weren't so painfully revealing of how conditional their regard had always been. When I finally reached my car and closed the door behind me, I sat in silence for a full minute, processing the emotional whiplash of the evening. My phone buzzed with notifications, text messages from various family members already following up on the connections they'd tried to establish as I left. I started the engine without reading them. The heritage was waiting, and there, surrounded by the team I'd built, and the dream I'd realized was where I truly belonged. The days following James's promotion party were a blur of emotions and revelations. The heritage catered the Meridian Corporation retreat the next weekend, an event that went flawlessly and cemented our reputation for high-end corporate events. Marcus Williams personally thanked me afterward, reiterating his interest in having me speak to their leadership team about entrepreneurship. James texted 3 days after the party asking if he could stop by the restaurant to see what all the fuss is about. I agreed, scheduling his visit during a quieter weekday lunch service, when I could actually spend some time with him. Watching my brother walk into the heritage for the first time was a surreal experience. He looked out of place in his corporate suit, yet also impressed as he took in the warm, inviting space I'd created. The exposed brick walls displayed rotating works from local artists. Tables handcrafted from reclaimed wood gleamed under subtle lighting. The open kitchen concept allowed diners to see our chefs at work, creating an atmosphere of transparency and craftsmanship. "This is not what I expected," James admitted as I gave him a tour. "It's sophisticated." I smiled at the surprise in his voice. "What did you expect, checkered tablecloths and ketchup bottles?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I guess I never really imagined it clearly. Mum and Dad always made it sound so small time, because that's how they saw it," I replied without bitterness. They couldn't reconcile their idea of success with what I was building. I showed him the private dining room where we hosted special events, the carefully organized kitchen with state-of-the-art equipment, the office where I managed the business side of operations. I introduced him to key staff members, my head chef Daniela, who had been with me for 3 years, Miguel, my operations manager, Sarah, who coordinated our private events and catering. Over lunch, a tasting menu I had Daniela prepare specially, James asked questions about the business with genuine interest for the first time, how I'd secured financing for the initial purchase, how I managed cash flow during seasonal fluctuations, the challenges of inventory management and staff retention. "It's a real business," he said finally, sounding almost apologetic for the implication that he'd thought otherwise. "It always was," I replied evenly. "You just couldn't see it." He nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for not visiting sooner, but for, buying into Mum and Dad's narrative about your choices. You've always been their vision of success," I said. "It was easier for all of you to see me as the one who strayed from the path rather than someone who chose a different, equally valid path." "Marcus hasn't stopped talking about your restaurant," James admitted. "He mentioned it again in our executive meeting yesterday. Do you know how rare that is for him to be genuinely impressed by something?" I smiled at the irony. "Funny how it took your boss's approval for my work to suddenly have value in our family's eyes." James had the decency to acknowledge the truth in this. "It's not right how things have been. I know that now." When he left, promising to return with his girlfriend for dinner, soon something had shifted between us. Not healed completely, but changed a crack in the wall of misunderstanding that had separated us for years. A week later, my parents called to ask if they could come see the restaurant. I agreed, suggesting a time before our dinner service began when I could give them a proper tour. The request itself was a monumental step, the first time they had expressed genuine interest in seeing my world. When they arrived, their discomfort was palpable. They seemed almost nervous, like visitors to a foreign country, unsure of local customs. I guided them through the space as I had with James, explaining our concept, introducing them to staff, showing them the systems and infrastructure I'd built. My mother touched the custom woodwork of the bar, ran her fingers over the hand-painted signage, examined the seasonal menu with its emphasis on local producers. "It's beautiful, Rafaela," she said finally. "I had no idea." "That's the point," I replied gently. "You never came to see." My father, ever practical, asked about finances, but this time with respect rather than skepticism. I showed him our growth charts, explained our profit margins, detailed our expansion plans. His expression shifted from curiosity to genuine surprise, and then to something I rarely saw directed at me, admiration. "You've built something substantial here," he acknowledged. "I was wrong about your choice. I'm sorry we haven't been more supportive." The words I'd waited years to hear felt both validating and strangely anticlimactic. The approval I'd once desperately sought now mattered less than it once had. I had proven myself not to them, but to myself and the world. Their recognition, while welcome, was no longer essential to my sense of worth. "I appreciate that," I said simply. "Would you like to stay for dinner? Experience what we do when we're in full service?" They accepted, and that evening, watching from my discreet corner table, as they enjoyed our chef's tasting menu, as they observed the seamless choreography of the service team, as they witnessed other diners' evident enjoyment, I saw them truly see my world for the first time. The healing began that night, but it was just the beginning of a long process. Years of dismissal and judgment couldn't be erased with a single dinner or apology. There were still uncomfortable moments at family gatherings, still occasions when old patterns threatened to resurface. But gradually, things changed. My parents began mentioning the heritage to their friends with pride. James brought business associates to the restaurant for dinner. Extended family who had once dismissed my work now boasted about their connection to that famous restaurant downtown. I accepted their evolving support with grace, but maintained the emotional boundaries I'd developed during those years of isolation. I built my chosen family around me. The loyal staff who had believed in my vision, the local producers who had partnered with me from the beginning, the regulars who had supported the heritage when it was still finding its identity. 6 months after James's promotion party, we opened our second location, the Heritage Garden, with an expanded concept that included a rooftop dining space and teaching kitchen where we offered culinary classes. My family attended the opening night genuinely proud and supportive. As I stood addressing the gathered crowd that evening, I caught sight of Samuel Wells, now 80, sitting at a reserved table near the front, his eyes bright with tears of pride. He had seen my potential when my own family couldn't, had believed in me, when belief was what I needed most. I realized then that the most valuable heritage isn't always the one we're born into. Sometimes it's the one we build for ourselves, whole, composed of the people who see us clearly, who nurture our authentic gifts, who believe in our vision even when it doesn't match conventional paths to success. The journey from family disgrace to respected entrepreneur had been painful at times, but it had also been profoundly formative. I had learned to trust my instincts to persist despite doubt, to find validation in my own achievements rather than others' approval. Most importantly, I had learned that success defined on my own terms was infinitely more satisfying than success measured against someone else's yardstick. Have you ever had to forge your own path against family expectations? Has anyone in your life ever underestimated or dismissed your dreams until outside validation forced them to see you differently? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you found something meaningful in my journey from family disgrace to vindication, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that staying true to their vision is worth it, even when the people closest to them don't understand. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the only approval that truly matters is your own.